In this video, we're going to show you how to install your SLT-1 trigger and K-arms ambidextrous selector into your receiver. For the purposes of this video, we're going to be filming using a rubber mat to install these components. However, ideally you would be using a workbench or armorer station with action block to perform this installation. It will be made a lot easier if you have the proper work setup to do so. You're going to need a few tools to do this: a light hammer, an Allen wrench or screwdriver as appropriate for your pistol grip screw, a few different size punches, and the Allen wrench that is included with your K-arms ambidextrous selector. For the purposes of this video, we're going to be using our K-arms trigger test block. This will allow you to see how the components go into the receiver much more easily than in an actual receiver. We will then finish the video installing it into an actual receiver by beginning with removing the existing fire control components. The first step of this process is simply inserting the SLT-1 into the receiver. We then want to put the K-arms ambidextrous selector into the receiver, having previously oriented it for 45 or 90 degree mode. In this case, this selector is oriented for 45 degree mode. We want to do this before installing the trigger and hammer pins because we want the safety selector to be able to be pushed past the trigger bar. If you have the pins installed first, you may not be able to push the trigger down enough to allow the safety selector to clear the rear trigger bar. To install the fire control pins, we want to orient them so the cutout on the pin is going from the right side to the left. There are D-clips on the left side of the SLT-1 trigger that retain the fire control pins in those cutouts. So we will push the SLT-1 down, lining up the holes, and we're going to get both pins started before we hammer them home. Again, we're using a rubber mat to avoid damaging the receiver, and we will use our punch and hammer to tap the pins the rest of the way into place. The pins are now in place, and we will test them by putting pressure on them with our smaller punch. We can see that the pins are locked in on the D-clips on the left-hand side of the trigger housing. Now that the trigger is in place, we're going to install the safety selector spring and detent. Remember that the conical point of the detent goes up into the receiver. We want to make sure that our spring for the selector detent is in the pistol grip, as you see here. Keeping all those components oriented together, we want to make sure that the spring goes into the hole of the receiver and it is not bound when doing so. We're now going to install the pistol grip screw. Take care that the washer stays on the pistol grip screw when you put it into the pistol grip. Alright, now that the pistol grip is in place, we can check the selector for function, making sure that it moves freely. Alright, we're going to test fire the trigger. In this case, we can let the hammer fall because we have a rubber block on the trigger test block that absorbs the impact. You would never do this on your actual receiver without putting your thumb in front of it to allow it to drop controlled. You can damage your receiver if you just allow the hammer to drop. Alright, so the hammer falls, the trigger resets like it should. We'll now put it on safe and attempt to pull the trigger. The hammer does not fall. We'll drop the hammer again, put the safety selector on safe, demonstrating the SLT-1's unique safe position. To finish the installation, all we need to do is put the other side of the selector arm onto the selector shaft. And if you were doing a permanent installation, you would want to use a drop of blue Loctite to secure the screw so it doesn't vibrate loose while you are firing. That's it. That's all that's required to install your SLT-1 trigger into your AR-15 receiver or other similar firearms capable of accepting AR-15 trigger components. First thing we're going to do to install the SLT-1 in an actual receiver is remove the pistol grip. When you remove the pistol grip, take care not to lose the spring and detent for the selector. The next thing we're going to do is remove the safety selector itself. With the hammer cocked, it should just fall out. We're going to use our smaller punch to tap out the fire control pins. Take care not to let the hammer fly out and hit you in the face. Now all the standard GI fire control has been removed and we can begin installation of the SLT-1. As before, we're going to begin with simply dropping the SLT-1 into the receiver. We're then going to install the safety selector, pushing down on the SLT-1, allowing it to clear the trigger bar as it goes through the receiver. The next thing we're going to do is install the fire control pins with the cutouts oriented so that they go into the left side of the receiver. Now that both pins are inserted and started, we're going to tap them into place using our hammer and punch. To test that the pins have been locked in, we're going to push on them with our smaller punch. They are in fact locked in. We're now going to install the pistol grip, beginning with the selector detent, again oriented with the conical point facing into the receiver. We're then going to make sure that the safety selector spring is still in the pistol grip and slide that onto the receiver. We're then going to begin screwing in the pistol grip screw until it is snug. Now that the pistol grip is in place, we're going to check the selector to make sure it moves freely. It does. We're going to put our thumb in front of the hammer and allow it to fall without damaging the receiver. The trigger does release the hammer and the trigger resets like it should. We're going to put the safety selector on safe, pull the trigger, nothing should happen. We're then going to drop the hammer, put the safety selector on safe to check that unique safety feature offered by the SLT-1. To finish the installation, all we need to do is install the other selector arm using the wrench provided in the K-Arms ambidextrous selector kit. Again, if you're doing a permanent installation, you'll want to use blue Loctite on the screws on both sides of the safety selector to make sure they do not vibrate loose under recoil. That's all there is to removing your existing factory fire control group and installing the SLT-1 trigger and K-Arms ambidextrous selector in your AR-15 type receiver or other similar firearm that uses AR-15 trigger components.